This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The World Health Organization says 242 new cases of Ebola reported in the last 21 days in the DRC as vaccination is intensified. Tunisian late President Essebsi's burial held today as Tunisians hope for a smooth transition. And South Sudan's Liberation Army in opposition releases 32 child soldiers. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. South African diaspora to pay tax both at home and abroad starting March 2020. And in sports, Diego Costa scores 4 and gets red carded as Atletico Madrid beat Real Madrid 7-3, can you believe it, in their first ever Madrid derby held in the U.S. Hello and welcome. We begin with the World Health Organization, where it has called on the U.S. Center for Disease Control to bolster the battle against the Ebola virus in the Democratic Republic of Congo by allowing more of its experts to travel to the outbreak zone. The World Health Organization also says that the deployment of vaccines has been instrumental in containing the current outbreak, which is the second largest in history. CGTN's Daniela Pearson reports.
Since the current Ebola outbreak began in the Democratic Republic of Congo, some 2,500 have been infected. Out of these, more than 1,700 have died. In March, the average number of new cases per week jumped from 40 to 90, with little sign of decreasing.
We've had 242 cases in the last 21 days in 64 health areas of the total 664 in North Kivu and Ituri.
The eastern parts of the DRC are the most affected, with the epidemic concentrated in the North Kivu and Ituri provinces. Earlier this week, the country's health minister resigned in protest as the office of the president took over the management of the outbreak, considered the second largest on record.
The difficulty in this response, as you've seen, is in order to do that, you have a very large operation that has to penetrate deeply into the community. In the context of conflict and mobility in North Kivu, that is a very difficult task. Sustaining that over a year in what often is a shooting war with multiple armed groups has been a challenge.
On the 17th of July, the head of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, declared the current outbreak a public health emergency of international concern. But he advised against any travel and trade restrictions with the DRC. However, on Wednesday, Saudi Arabia made the decision to suspend Congolese visas ahead of the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca next month. The WHO is currently finalizing its fourth response plan to the deadly virus.
Ebola is a disease that can be controlled without a vaccine. But in this case, and particularly because we're working in such a very difficult situation, we believe the vaccine has been vital in breaking the chains of transmission.
While there is no licensed treatment for Ebola, patients are able to take part in clinical trials of vaccines. Emergency responders have been using the Merck vaccine, but now there is mounting international pressure to deploy a second experimental one by Johnson & Johnson.
The Merck vaccine is specifically designed for an outbreak response. It's a single-dose vaccine. Protection is within 10 days, and therefore the vaccine is highly targeted at an outbreak situation. The J&J vaccine, while an excellent product, is a 2-dose vaccine given 56 days apart. It requires quite a time to develop immunity. It could be and is potentially very useful in health workers and others, but there are operational challenges in using it in a full-scale epidemic response.
This epidemic is the first in which the Ebola vaccine has been used from the very start of the outbreak in order to contain it. Health workers are using a ring vaccination approach, where the immediate circle of people in contact with a confirmed Ebola case are offered the vaccine.
Yesterday I was looking at the numbers, and of all the vaccination rings that had to be started in the last 21 days, of those 242 cases, only 2 rings had not started because of community acceptance issues or security. When you think 240 of 242 vaccination rings were underway, that is not a result of a distrusting community. 95% of communities are now accepting safe and dignified burials. Again, someone coming into your village or your house and working with you, but taking your loved one away and burying them in a safe way, with all of the images we see of body bags. Again, this is a deeply traumatic time for a family, and the fact that 90 to 95% of those families accept that form of burial is a testament to how much they accept the response.
The WHO is also saying it needs the help of the United States in the Ebola response in the DRC.
Over the years, the US Centre for Disease Control has been a major partner with Ngorn and with WHO. I've said it in the past, I'll say it again. It is hard to fight a battle without your best ally at your side. But our colleagues in CDC have provided amazing support, both in Congo, in the surrounding countries, here in Geneva, in our operations centre, in backstopping and providing high-level technical assistance to the response.
The WHO Emergency Director particularly commended the work of social community workers in raising awareness and building trust in the local communities. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
Let's now turn to Tunisia, where the burial of the late President Beji Caid Essebsi is being held today. Citizens are mourning their late president, who was the first to be democratically elected into office. Before his passing, the 92-year-old had called for the younger generation to lead. Citizens not only mourned his passing, but also echoed his call for younger leaders.
The people are touched by the president with all their hearts. All of Tunis is affected. Whoever tells you that they are not affected is lying to you. Everyone is touched by the president, both the young and the old. Tunisia is struggling and has been since the revolution. I am one of the people that hope for a younger president.
But may God have mercy on our President Caid Essebsi. He knew the history of Tunisia, the history of the states. He was skilled at being a leader, at being diplomatic. We wished he was younger, but his fate was already written. God have mercy on him.
And on to the Horn of Africa now, and the Somali president has called for a new approach in tackling insurgency. The comments comes days after al-Shabaab targeted the mayor of Mogadishu in a deadly suicide attack. From Mogadishu, CGTN's Abdulaziz Billo with the latest.
Victims of Wednesday's suicide attack have been laid to rest in an emotional send-off in the capital, Mogadishu. 7 high-level government officials were among the dead. Those buried include 2 female district commissioners recently appointed by the city mayor, who was also seriously wounded in the explosion. Authorities say that a female suicide bomber carried out the attack, targeting a high-level security gathering chaired by the mayor of Mogadishu and regional heads.
Al-Shabaab continues to target people indiscriminately. The young and the old, civilians, government officials, women and children alike, with an objective of eliminating the existence of a Somali state and the government. Such attacks prove how weak the group has become.
12 blast victims, including the mayor of the capital, Abdurrahman Omar Osman, have been evacuated to Qatar for specialized treatment. The military air ambulance left Mogadishu on Thursday evening. Victims of a recent terrorist attack in the port city of Kismayo were also among those airlifted for treatment. The country's President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo called for an urgent meeting with security chiefs to seek answers as to how al-Shabaab infiltrated the local government headquarters and carried out such a high-profile attack despite increased security measures across the city.
The President has ordered the Council of Ministers to come up with a comprehensive plan to counter inside collaborators of al-Shabaab, the financiers as well as its informers. It is unacceptable for terrorist elements to be in our midst and cause attacks against civilians and the government.
The Al-Qaeda-linked group says its target was the UN Special Envoy to Somalia, James Swan, who had left the Mogadishu local government headquarters prior to the attack. A number of people have been arrested in connection with the attack against the mayor of Mogadishu. Security heads here in the capital have also been put to task to explain how the militant group was able to smuggle explosives into the heavily fortified compound to carry out such a high-profile attack that has since created suspicion that the bomber might have had inside support. Meanwhile, police have beefed up security in major government installations as Al-Shabaab warns of more attacks against the Somali government and its international partners. Abdul Aziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
A new group of Ugandan peacekeepers has arrived in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu. The group is in charge of ensuring the safety of the United Nations staff. Their arrival comes just days after the deadly suicide attack carried out by Al-Shabaab in Mogadishu. The arrival of the hundreds of new soldiers was welcomed by the UN Secretary General's Special Representative for Somalia, James Swan, and the commander of Uganda's land forces, Lieutenant General Peter Elwelu. The soldiers will serve in the UN Guard unit, replacing an outgoing group of soldiers.
What I want you to promote here is the spirit of comradeship. You officers, spirit of comradeship, very important.
Well, to South Sudan, where the government now says President Salva Kiir is ready to meet opposition leader Riek Machar this month, but that the meeting should be in South Sudan. This comes as the UN, African Union, and the East African regional body, IGAD, all say the two former rivals should meet regularly before November to try and push the country's peace process forward. CGTN's Patrick Oyet sat down with President Salva Kiir's spokesman, Ateni Wek Ateni, and here's what he had to say.
I don't think there is any scheduled meeting between the president and the opposition leader anywhere outside South Sudan. The president is traveling to Addis on the invitation of His Excellency, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Dr. Abiy Ahmed. And there is no any scheduled meeting between him and Riek Machar.
There was a proposal that the meeting should take place in Juba, in South Sudan. What happened to that proposal?
Well, it is Dr. Riek who is not willing to come to Juba. And the agreement had it that he should be in Juba.
And some people say that he is concerned about his security. What do you say about that?
His advanced team is here, his deputy is here, his wife, Angelina Tang, is here. And this should have spelled out clear to Dr. Riek that he is coming to Juba will be the same as these are the senior officials of the IO in Juba. By setting up conditions, it doesn't seem to help the implementation of his agreement very much, because as a leader, he should break all this deadlock and come to Juba. When he comes to Juba, President Kiir is willing to meet him.
Could you just tell us how committed is President Salva Kiir to the current peace agreement?
President Salva Kiir is the most committed person among all the stakeholders, among all those who have signed his agreement, because he is the incumbent president. Apart from his national love for peace, he is the incumbent president. He wanted to continue to govern a country that is peaceful. And so his prime concern is to see that South Sudan return to normalcy so that he could continue as a president of a peaceful country. So President Salva Kiir is the most committed person. He's only let down by those who don't think beyond just personal.
Still in South Sudan, after 3 months of negotiations by the UN peacekeeping mission in South Sudan, UNICEF, armed groups, and national partners, 32 Sudanese child soldiers have been set free. The group had spent the last 5 years fighting for and supporting opposition forces in the Unity region of South Sudan. The young men are now facing the challenge of reintegration into their communities. Authorities are now trying to ensure that they are given the support they need so that they don't return to the armed forces.
And everyone was actually crying over the phone when we called them. Most of them, they told us that they were not certain to see their children again. So there were lots of emotions, and definitely they're waiting for them to go back.
What has happened over the last few years, we have to end it. We have to find it in our hearts to reconcile and forgive ourselves and unite ourselves as brothers of one country who liberated this country together.
Well, thousands of protesters have held a sit-in at Hong Kong International Airport. The demonstrators dressed in black and sat on the ground, gradually filling the entire arrivals hall on Friday night. A video clip shows an elderly passenger being surrounded by protesters. One of them shouted at the elderly man while others posted a yellow slogan on his back. They chased him and smashed him into a wall. They then cornered him at a bus stop and trampled on his suitcase. Protests started in opposition to proposed amendments to the Fugitive Offenders Law and have turned violent at times. Singapore has advised its travelers to avoid protest areas. China's foreign ministry has condemned a call by a protest organization in Hong Kong for foreign consulates to issue travel alerts to the city. And Hong Kong officials have also expressed their concern that the continuing protests are hurting the region's economy.
No good end for those who collude with external forces trying to harm China. That's how the Chinese Foreign Ministry responded, condemning a call by a protest organization in Hong Kong for foreign consulates to issue travel alerts to the city.
The fact that some are asking foreign countries to issue travel warnings to Hong Kong was in essence an attempt to provoke outside forces to interfere in Hong Kong's affairs and to put pressure on the central government and the SAR government. Hong Kong is China's Hong Kong, and no foreign forces can interfere in any way. I recommend those who are trying to lure wolves into their house to read history well. There has never been a good end for those who collude with external forces and harm the country.
Hong Kong International Airport, where a sit-in took place Friday night, is a significant transportation hub and one of the busiest airports in the world, with passenger volume ranking 5th globally. Hong Kong residents have expressed their indignation at the sit-ins and protests. Many say the violence has not only severely disrupted Hong Kong's social order, but also affected the city's business environment and people's lives.
The economy of Hong Kong has been affected in a big way. Our exports in June saw a decrease of 9% points from last year, and we are really concerned about this. If the situation continues, the economy will be in big trouble.
We noticed that in the past few weeks, there were cancellations of short visits to Hong Kong. Some regions and countries have seen 20 to 30% of tourist groups to Hong Kong cancel their trips, which will affect some hundreds of thousands of people working in the industry. If the situation continues, the industry and the related industries will suffer huge losses.
The news continues on Africa Live. We have a lot more stories coming your way, including medical experts meet in Senegal to find ways of tackling challenges facing the African pharmaceutical sector. And we focus on the 2 top men leading the anti-corruption war in Kenya.
Africa, the most iconic wildlife destination in the world. Its unique ecosystems were formed over countless eons. Many people can only dream of visiting this natural paradise. But now, for the first time ever, CGTN Wild Wonderland live show is bringing Africa to you through all of our online platforms. 14 episodes from July 22nd to 28th take you to adventure through the Great Plains of Kenya's Masai Mara, the Serengeti in Tanzania, and the Greater Kruger Park in South Africa. Welcome aboard the wildest ride of a lifetime. This is Wild Wonderland live show, only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's now turn to the Mediterranean, where migrant crossings continue to take place despite over 100 people drowning on Thursday. The accident was deemed the Mediterranean's worst shipwreck this year. Despite this, Libyan officers intercepted another boat of migrants looking to reach Italy. The tens of migrants were returned to Libya.
We found the migrants at sea, around 27 miles at sea, in front of the town of Castelvad. They were taken to Tajura, where they are receiving medical care. We are waiting for Liwa Migration Center in order to transfer them there. Sometimes the rescue missions are slow due to the inability of migration centers to take all the migrants.
Well, Italian and Maltese officials are taking very different approaches to the Mediterranean migrations. The armed forces of Malta rescued 67 migrants. The forces brought the migrants to the Maltese capital of Valletta. Malta has taken in and around 143 people in a 24-hour period. Meanwhile, in Italy, the country's Gregoretti Coast Guard vessels rescued 135 migrants from 2 boats off Malta. Italian Interior Minister Matteo Salvini and the country's Deputy Prime Minister have refused to allow the Coast Guard to dock. Salvini added none of the migrants would be allowed to dock until a European agreement had been reached on their redistribution. Both Italy and Malta are popular entry ports for migrants and refugees looking to reach Europe. Well, the arrest of the Treasury Minister in Kenya and a host of his juniors has once again shifted the debate to the corruption investigations in Kenya. Leading these investigations are 2 men with contrasting backgrounds. One is a son of a senior political leader in Kenya, while the other is an offspring of urban poor parents who grew up in one of the slums in Nairobi. However, their unity in the fight against corruption has put them on the local and international map. Here is CGTN's Uche Okoronkwo with the tale of Kenya's Director of Public Prosecutions and the head of the country's investigating agency.
Growing up as a son of a senior administrator in Kenya, Nurdin Haji had all the best that life could offer. His father is currently a senator. On the other end of life was George Kinoti. His life a total contrast from Haji's. He grew up in one of the slums in the Kenyan capital of Nairobi, where life was tough.
Me, I've come from the lowest of the society. That's why I was picked as a child, brought up by a mission. I have no idea where my money for my education came from, up to and including to the university. So when I look back and they say, let's say, our country is in plenty, and all the resources of this country are consolidated for the good of Kenyans. If I did not have somebody who sympathized to pick me and under sponsor, all the way in Europe, in Italy, actually, you have to be specific, to take care of me. But when knowing we have this country, everything, free education, free health, and all that, but I see the amount of money, you can see the amount of money we have, which actually is not little money. It can run this country, absolutely. It's going to individual people's pocket. Then you come and put me in the same bandwagon to deprive these people again. Where I've come from. Who are they crying to?
Haji would join the Kenyan intelligence and later be appointed as Director of Public Prosecutions, a post he currently holds. George, on his part, would rise through police ranks and head the country's criminal investigations agency. But the war on corruption has made these 2 gentlemen's paths cross.
We do have a personal relationship as friends. That goes a long way to build that relationship. And I think the president also has picked individuals who he believes can work together. If you look at the Inspector General, he's a colleague of mine. The EACC director was a former colleague. And we are able to sit down and agree without having tough wars amongst ourselves.
It is a unity of purpose driven by a duty to fight corruption and a dream to achieve the successful prosecution of people in high offices. In the wake of their collaboration, big names have fallen. Kenya's Minister of Finance and other senior officials at Treasury are the latest suspects to be dragged before court. But their initial crack struck at the country's National Youth Service, where over $100 million was alleged to have been lost through graft.
The test case was NYS, and quite a number of officers had to fall on the side because there was still those old frictions and silos, and we had to then build a team that would gel them together, and we've managed to do that.
That's the reason we say we are rejuvenated, we have been renewed, and more or less it's a renaissance as far as the DCI is concerned, because now the DPP is part and parcel of us.
Since then, these two men and their teams have instilled fear in the hearts of many.
He is the first DPP, I can say, who is a polished field officer. And investigations, he knows very well because it was by capacity of his responsibility. He was an investigator, in as much as he was in the intelligence. He was an operational man. This guy has commanded good operations, which even we did together.
Whether these two will see the end of corruption in the East African nation, only time will tell. Uche Okoronkwo, CGTN.
Africa accounts for about 3% of global pharmaceutical production. Medical experts from Africa and Europe met in the Senegalese capital of Dakar for the International Medicine Show. They tackled the various challenges the African pharmaceutical sector faces.
For its 7th edition, the International Medicine Show's theme centered on policies for the better management of chronic diseases.
It is important to understand that all these diseases have very expensive treatments, which are not within the reach of many of the African populations.
Aside from the issue of cost, the continent also has to tackle the challenge of counterfeit medication. Africa imports around 70% of pharmaceutical medications. According to the World Health Organization, 1 in 10 medical products in developing countries were either substandard or counterfeit.
To cover drug needs, it is necessary to promote a real pharmaceutical industry policy. This is possible through tax incentives, a favorable legal environment, and protection of this pharmaceutical industry. The high cost of raw materials and energy prevents the pharmaceutical industry to better face competition and competitiveness of foreign industries importing cheaper drugs.
The exhibition looks to have leaders of the pharmaceutical industry not only mingle, but also find solutions.
After the fair, we expect positive spin-offs in terms of partnership because this fair brings together a good number of national and international partners who are active in the field of medicine, the pharmaceutical industry, as well as the medical device industry.
Africa only accounts for about 3% of global pharmaceutical production, but attendees of the fair are looking to change that. Astatal, CGTN.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
a recap of some of the top stories making headlines this hour. The World Health Organization has called on the U.S. Center for Disease Control to bolster the battle against the Ebola virus in the Democratic Republic of Congo by allowing more experts to travel to the outbreak zone. The World Health Organization also says that the deployment of vaccines has been instrumental in containing the current outbreak in the second largest outbreak in history. And in Tunisia, the burial of the late President Beji Caid Essebsi is being held today. Citizens are mourning their late president, who was the first to be democratically elected into office. Before his passing, the 92-year-old had called for the younger generation to lead. Citizens not only mourned his passing, but also echoed his call for younger leaders. Somalia's President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo is calling for a new approach in tackling insurgency. He spoke as 7 high-level government officials were buried following the deadly suicide attack in Mogadishu on Wednesday. The president has called an urgent meeting with security chiefs to seek answers on how Al-Shabaab infiltrated the local government headquarters and carried out such a high-profile attack. And 3 months of negotiations by UN peacekeeping missions in South Sudan, UNICEF, armed groups, and national partners. 32 Sudanese child soldiers have been set free. The group had spent the last 5 years fighting for and supporting opposition forces in the Unity region of South Sudan. Authorities are now trying to ensure that they are given the support that they need so that they don't return to the armed forces. And that's a recap of your top stories making headlines this hour. All right, the news continues on Africa Live. Let's take a look at our business headlines coming up next. South African diaspora to pay tax both at home and abroad starting March 2020. A catering business provides employment for refugees and underprivileged women in Egypt.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. In South Africa, an amended income tax law now gives the state the legal mandate to tax income of South African nationals living and working outside the country, even if that income was not derived from activities in South Africa. From March 2020, this will take place. Citizens outside the country will have to pay taxes on their income to the South African Revenue Service, even if they're paying tax in the country they reside and work in. CGTN's Richard Nta starts us off.
Currently, South Africans living and working abroad are exempt from paying tax in South Africa. Government has now amended the Income Tax Act, placing a restriction on this exemption of around $72,000 for an individual. If you earn more overseas, only a portion of that income will be exempted for South African tax purposes.
The law changes from 1 March 2020. It was promulgated in December 2017, though. The law pretty much stays the same, except there is now a threshold of 1 million rand that can be exempt. And that means everything above that million rand would therefore be taxable in South Africa.
The tax amendment has caused a flurry of inquiries and a bit of panic amongst those living abroad.
You've got South Africans working abroad, generally there to earn an income, send it back to family back home, trying to save for retirement, for instance, and now they're looking at what are we going to do? We cannot afford to continue working abroad. So the impact, what we're seeing is that South Africans are deciding to break tax residency with South Africa so that the new law doesn't affect them.
Another term for seizing one's tax residency is financial immigration. So one doesn't need to physically immigrate, they can just seize their financial status in the country and will no longer be a tax resident of South Africa.
We do have double taxation agreements with many countries in the world, and those can often assist with ensuring that double tax is not paid. In certain countries we don't have that agreement. For instance, with the UAE, there is zero income tax, and South Africa thinks great, but they don't realize the cost of living in those countries and the other taxes that are paid that are not personal income tax, which are massive actually. With this new law, South Africans just would not be able to afford paying those taxes and those expenses as well as taxes in South Africa.
Not everyone will have to cease their tax residency in South Africa, but there will be implications, including penalties for those found avoiding their new tax liability. Richard Nta, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
The UN Agency on Trade and Investment says remittances are a key source of capital and spending for many African economies. For instance, in 2018, Diaspora remittances were one of Kenya's highest foreign exchange earners at $2.8 billion, raking in more earnings than tea and tourism. CGTN's Geru Mchala explored ways governments can make it easier for remittances to flow with the head of the UNCTAD regional office in Africa.
So at UNCTAD, we have studied this issue in substantial detail and published our findings in the Economic Development in Africa Report 2018, which is aptly titled Migration for Structural Transformation. And there we propose to bring down the cost. It is still costing way too much to bring remittances to Africa. When you think about an 8.9% cost per transaction, it eats a lot out of that which would come ultimately to finance development. The average in developing countries is about 7.6, but globally we're working at bringing this down to 3% in terms of an SDG target. How do you do this? You do this by empowering more local companies to engage in facilitating this movement of money so that they gain the trust of the banks. As you have more supply, the cost goes down. So bringing the cost down is critical. The second point would be in terms of creating financing instruments that allow for the diaspora to contribute to government in its objective of funding development. How do you do that? You do that through diaspora bonds, which is this idea of opening up a negotiating instrument, treasury bond, for example, to which diaspora could contribute. Countries like Ghana have done this with success. Ethiopia has done this with success with respect to the dam.
As you know, it's also important to talk about the future of the diaspora at this time, the returnees themselves, and the future that is going to await them in this in their respective countries of origin. What is your suggestion when it comes to this this idea of building a better future for the diaspora who are planning to return home?
Formalizing the channels of the way in which money moves is important because it creates transparency and accountability and avoids the risks of informal channels. Two is this idea of incentivizing them to come home through perhaps financial instruments like reduction in tariffs, avoiding certain duties on products that they want to bring back home, machinery and so on and so forth, creating an infrastructure at home where if they want to engage in certain investment infrastructure that they're given holidays from having to pay certain taxes and so on and so forth. But ultimately creating the environment where the push factors that got them to go are improved, this whole enabling environment, that when you come home you can actually enjoy the fruits of that which you've been working hard for through sending your remittances.
A catering business in Cairo is bearing fruit for refugees and underprivileged women. The enterprise is known as Diaspora Kitchen, and it brings migrants together for a chance to integrate multiple communities while also offering women a way to make a steady growing income. CGTN's Alexandria Majala takes up the story.
Dareen is a Syrian woman living in Cairo, Egypt's capital. Here in Esbat Khairala, one of the largest slums in Cairo, she rolls the first vine leaf of the day, only briefly stopping to compare cooking styles with her Sudanese and Egyptian peers. Dareen is among migrant, refugee and Egyptian women who are all members of Diaspora Kitchen. The kitchen is a cooking project aimed at strengthening community integration while providing employment opportunities.
Honestly, when I'm with Syrian women from my country or Sudanese or Egyptian women, I am comfortable. One woman could share her struggles, which eases my struggles. I mean that I feel I'm not living through the pain alone. They are too.
It provides a small-sized catering service to customers around Cairo, specializing in Syrian, Egyptian, and sometimes Sudanese cuisines. So far, the kitchen employs 11 women. Syrian ma'aluba, hara esbao, and hummus are amongst many orders prepared throughout the day to be sent out to customers.
The employment opportunities available are mainly for men through the wood and steel recycling workshops. Women here, however, have very limited training and employment opportunities through a limited amount of associations. We found that if we start this project in Azbet Karala, we will provide employment opportunities for Syrian women and other nationalities, in addition to providing training and employment opportunities for women from the area, while also creating a chance for community integration. From here, the idea started and we decided to embark on this experience and see the result.
The project emphasizes the importance of cultural integration, often encouraging the women to become friends rather than colleagues. The non-profit kitchen was founded in 2018 through the Dawar for Arts and Development project, which included 1,000 women, men and youth from Egypt, Syria, Sudan, Yemen, Ethiopia and Somalia.
Very, very humble location, and the food that's coming out is fantastic, world quality, top-notch. And it's being produced at a high standard, very high level. The women are superb, absolutely superb. So the style is Syrian, which is a little different from the Egyptian, but still the same types of food. It's just amazing, quite amazing.
According to a UNHCR survey, out of 100,000 Syrians living in Egypt, more than 77% were in debt in 2017, up from 73% the year before. Egypt has much smaller refugee populations than Jordan, Lebanon and Turkey, where most of those displaced by Syria's war have fled. But refugees and asylum seekers reside in Egyptian communities rather than camps, and those without means are directly exposed to economic hardships. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Indeed, the news continues on Africa Live. We've got a lot more wonderful, amazing, and inspiring stories coming your way. Here's a look at what's ahead. We take you to Uganda, where refugees are given free land to build homes and to carry out agricultural activities. Nigeria is my home. 160 million vibrant, ambitious individuals constantly seeking the perfect self-expression. It is these people who inspired me to be that person that is seen, to be a voice that is heard, and ultimately to be the anchor that I am. I have to tap in, tune in, and turn on the very best qualities within me to deliver the news. I'm Richard Nta, an anchor for CGTN.
Between 2007 and 2014, the African savanna elephant population declined by 144,000 animals, decimated mainly by poaching. In Tanzania, home of the iconic Serengeti National Park, the elephant population has shrunk by 60% in 5 years. Now, in response to this environmental crisis, a new approach to wildlife conservation is being pioneered, turning poachers into game scouts, deploying cutting-edge technology, and uplifting local communities through education and job creation. This is the story of the men and women who are working to bring the great elephant herds back to the African savanna.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Uganda has one of the world's most progressive approaches to asylum seekers. The East African country is particularly remarkable because many refugee families are given a plot of agricultural land and raw materials to build their own home upon arrival. CGTN's Daniel Arap Moy has been speaking to some of these refugees.
Uganda has been subject to a great deal of international attention for the way it has fostered positive relations between host communities and refugees. Despite the huge numbers of refugees arriving every day from the Democratic Republic of Congo, the East African country has continued to allocate free land to refugee households for agricultural production. Basa Kene is one among hundreds of refugees who have fled the unrest in his home country to seek refuge in Uganda. Basa, who lives with his wife and 6 children, was allocated a piece of land in Changwali refugee settlement southwest of Uganda's Hoima district, a place he has lived for the past 2 years. Basa used part of the land given to him by the Ugandan government to build a small house for his family. The remainder of the land was used to cultivate a few crops to supplement the family's diet, away from the weekly food distribution by the World Food Programme.
As we receive them, after refugee getting a status, getting an attestation, a prima facie, that family is allocated a piece of land, 50 by 100 meters. So this refugee is supposed to use this land, build a house, put a toilet, and use part of that land for growing these simple crops.
Basa Kene, just like many other refugees benefiting from Uganda's generous land policy, is appreciative for what he has been allocated.
We're given free plots of land, and despite it being small in size, we are very happy because this is not our country, it's Uganda, so we appreciate it.
Many of the refugees who have been allocated land are positively contributing to the local economy of Uganda as they purchase tools and supplies from local businesses. Uganda's policy permits refugees to work, cultivate land and move around freely, rights rarely granted to that extent in other countries of first asylum, where their rivals are typically viewed as competitors for jobs and scarce resources. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN, Hoima District, Uganda.
All right, we've got your sports news coming up after the break. Don't go away, don't touch that dial. Here's a look at what's ahead. Diego Costa scores 4 and gets red carded as